When people talk about the Amiga, platformers aren't usually the first thing that comes to mind. Sure, the machine is rightly praised for its strategy games, simulations, and demo scene brilliance, but let's be honest, its platformers often get a bad rap. But that's not the full story. Hidden amongst the misfires are some absolute gems. I'm John Boatofcar Shawler from the Amigos podcast, and today we're celebrating the Amiga's platforming greats, the ones that really nailed it. Let's jump in. Coming in at number 10, it's PP Hammer. Released in 1991 by Abandonware, this quirky puzzle platformer feels like a cross between Lode Runner and Boulder Dash, with a focus on digging through blocks, solving puzzles, and collecting treasure. You play as PP, a charming little miner armed with a pneumatic drill and a goofy gait that screams early 90s European design. The colorful levels are packed with details, but don't let the cheerful visuals fool you. This game gets tough fast. Success requires careful planning. Dig here, grab that key, avoid traps and enemies, mess up, and you'll often have no way out, making frequent saving essential. The controls are a bit clunky, and PP's floaty movement can make precision digging frustrating. The repetitive drilling noise doesn't help either. But the satisfaction of cracking a tricky level makes it all worthwhile, delivering plenty of aha moments. PP Hammer is an endearing and brain-teasing gem that rewards patience. If you're up for a challenge, this one's worth digging into. When people talk about the Amiga's golden age, Superfrog inevitably comes up, and for good reason. Released in 1993 by Team 17, this bright and bouncy platformer captures everything that made the Amiga scene so vibrant and unique. It's slick, quirky, and full of heart, a platformer that practically leaps off the screen. The gameplay is where Superfrog really earns its stripes. It takes some obvious cues from Sonic the Hedgehog, particularly in its speed and level design, but it doesn't feel derivative. Instead, it feels like Team 17 took that blueprint and gave it an Amiga twist. The controls are silky smooth with just the right amount of weight to Superfrog's jumps and dashes. Levels are sprawling and layered, rewarding players who love to explore with hidden treasure and extra lives. And then there's the soundtrack. Alistair Brimble was on absolute fire here, delivering one of the Amiga's most memorable scores. Each level has its own catchy, atmospheric tune that sticks with you long after you switch the machine off, perfectly matching the game's lively aesthetic. Superfrog is just pure fun, a joy to play from start to finish. It's the kind of game that feels so quintessentially Amiga, a bit cheeky, undeniably creative, and polished to a mere shine. When you hear the words Tony the Tiger, your mind likely conjures up images of Frosted Flakes and breakfast. Not a mid-90s platformer. But Tony and Friends in Kellogg's Land, released in 1994 by famed developer Factor 5, proves even cereal mascots can jump into the gaming world. And while it's no Super Mario World, this promotional tie-in is surprisingly competent, like the free toy at the bottom of your cereal box that's actually kind of fun. Let's start with the plot, or what passes for one. Tony the Tiger and his sugary pals, the monkey guy, the cereal frog, I don't know. They're out to save the world from something. None of this really matters. This is a game designed to make you eat more cereal, not ponder the narrative intricacies of breakfast brand mascots. The story is a thin excuse to get you hopping through colorful levels, and that's perfectly fine. Graphically, Kellogg's Land is a treat. The visuals are bright, cartoony, and packed with charm. The animations are smooth, and Tony himself has a certain swagger as he struts across the screen. For a freebie game that came bundled with boxes of Frosties, it's clear Factor 5 put in more effort than anyone had a right to expect. Tony and Friends in Kellogg's Land is a spoonful of fun that's worth a nibble, but not a full meal. When Soccer Kid hit the Amiga in 1993, it was clear that Chrysalis Software wasn't just chasing platformer trends, they were blazing their own trail. Marrying the precision of a well-placed penalty kick with the running and jumping of a side-scrolling platformer, Soccer Kid isn't just another mascot with attitude game. It's a creative twist that stands out among its peers. The story is gloriously silly. An alien crashes into Earth and shatters the World Cup trophy into pieces, scattering them across the globe. It's up to Soccer Kid, a football-obsessed lad with endless determination, to retrieve the pieces and restore the trophy in time for the big match. Between that and collecting football stickers as you go, it sets the tone for a lighthearted adventure that combines kicking the old hand egg with platforming in ways you wouldn't expect. Soccer Kid is one of those games that could have easily been a throwaway novelty, but instead became a standout entry in the Amiga's library. Its unique blend of football and platforming, coupled with its charming presentation, makes it a home run, or whatever that is in soccer. If there's one thing the early 90s taught us, it's that mascots could be anything. Hedgehogs? Sure. Bandicoots? Why not? And in the case of James Pond 2, we get a fish. Not just any fish, mind you. This is James Pond, the world's most charming aquatic secret agent, back for his second mission. Released in 1991 for a multitude of platforms, including the Amiga, the Mega Drive, and eventually the Super Nintendo, James Pond 2 is a sequel that dials everything up to 11. Gone is the humble, eco-friendly theme of the first game. This time, Pond straps into a robotic suit that gives him extendable height and takes on none other than Dr. Maybe, an evil mastermind who set up shop in Santa's workshop. If that sounds bonkers, it's because it is. Where James Bond 2 really shines is its sense of humor. This is a game that knows exactly how silly it is, and it leans into that silliness at every turn. Whether it's the absurd premise, the ridiculous enemy designs, or the sheer joy of watching what Ravi Abbott calls the James Pond jig, Mr. Pond is a real fish out of water, but in the best way. Quirky, charming, and occasionally frustrating, James Pond 2 is worth a swim. We're halfway there, and number 5 on our list is BC Kid. When BC Kid, better known as Bonk's Adventure on other platforms, arrived on the Amiga in 1992, it brought something of a novelty, a port of a game that had already achieved cult status on the TurboGrafx 16. With its prehistoric charm and unique head-butting mechanic, BC Kid carved out a niche for itself in the platforming world. The core gameplay of BC Kid revolves around its hero, a toothy, grinning caveman with a penchant for smashing enemies with its oversized noggin. Unlike most platformers of the era, where stomping on enemies is the go-to move, BC Kid stands out by focusing on headbutts, which are satisfyingly responsive and fun to pull off. Whether you're bashing enemies or smashing obstacles, there's a tactile joy to the game's combat. While BC Kid doesn't reinvent the wheel, it's a solid and thoroughly enjoyable platformer that brings something a little different to the Amiga library. Its charm lies in its simplicity and personality, from the quirky headbutt mechanic to the vibrant prehistoric world. It might not have the depth of Mario or the speed of Sonic, but it has heart and head, and sometimes that's all you need. If you were gaming on the Amiga back in the early 90s, you probably remember these tiny, adorable fluff balls who pack a surprising punch. Developed by Callisto Entertainment in 1993, Fury the Furries is an absolute delight, a platformer that combines charm, challenge, and creativity in equal measure. It's the sort of title that reminds you why the Amiga was a playground for innovation in the first place. The premise is simple but effective. You control a group of tinies, small, round creatures with big eyes and even bigger personalities, as you attempt to rescue your kidnapped king. Each tiny has a unique ability, and switching between them on the fly is essential for solving puzzles and overcoming obstacles. There's a fire-breathing tiny, a grappling tiny, a swimming tiny, and a digging tiny. Think of it as a platformer meets puzzle-type game with just a hint of the Lost Vikings sprinkled in. What really sets Fury the Furries apart, though, is its level design. Each stage feels like a new challenge, with fresh ideas and clever mechanics. You never feel like you're just going through the motions. Instead, the game constantly pushes you to think, adapt, and experiment with the Tiny's abilities. Pair that with some of the best music ever to grace the platform, and you have a warm and fuzzy combination. By the early 1990s, the gaming world was drowning in mascot platformers, each hoping to snag a slice of the pie that Mario and Sonic had all but devoured on the consoles. Enter Mr. Nuts, a cocky red squirrel with a knack for acorns and adventure. Released on the Amiga in 1994, this game was a port of the SNES original from the same developers that brought us the classic shooter Apidya. While it may not have redefined the genre, the Speedy Squirrel brought a dose of charm and its own unique spin to this platformer-rich era. The soundtrack of Mr. Nuts is cheerful and upbeat, fitting perfectly with the game's playful tone. The overworld sections include dialogue with various characters, which breaks up the platforming action with some humorous exchanges. The sound effects are crisp and satisfying, with a jaunty bounce to every jump and a satisfying pop when an enemy is defeated. While finishing the game may be a tough nut to crack, Mr. Nuts is a classic case of doing the basics exceptionally well. The runner-up spot on the list goes to Aladdin. By the time this game graced the Amiga in 1994, the game had already garnered acclaim on the Sega Mega Drive with its fluid animation, cinematic flair, and tight platforming. Finally, a game that looked as good as Prince of Persia or Out of This World, but controlled like a platforming game should. As you might expect, in this game you guide the dashing title character through a variety of stages inspired by the 1992 Disney film, from the bustling streets of Agrabah to the depths of the Cave of Wonders. The core mechanics are simple but satisfying. Aladdin can slash with a sword, hurl apples, and perform nimble platforming maneuvers. The game alternates between combat-heavy sequences and more exploratory sections with secrets and bonus areas hidden throughout the levels. Aladdin on the Amiga isn't the definitive version of the game. That honor still belongs to the Mega Drive. While the Mega Drive version featured a rich, dynamic soundtrack that brought Alan Menken's iconic film score to life, the Amiga's music feels stripped down and less impactful. The melodies are still recognizable and enjoyable, but they lack the depth and energy that you hear on the Sega machine. However, it's a very strong effort that brings much of the original's magic to Commodore's beloved platform. The stunning animation, charming gameplay, and faithfulness to the source material make Aladdin a standout title in the Amiga's library. And now we come to my favorite platformer on the Amiga. Just like Aladdin, when it comes to licensed games, the Addams Family is a standout example of how to do it right. Released in 1992 by Ocean, this platformer puts you in the role of Gomez Addams as he sets out to rescue his kidnapped family members and reclaim his spooky mansion. What could have been a simple cash grab turns out to be a surprisingly polished and fun game that stands tall among the Amiga's platforming greats. The variety in the Addams Family is a big part of its charm. Every room in the mansion has its own distinct theme, from the oven's fiery furnace in the kitchen, to the gondola ride to the treasure room in the cellar. The enemy designs are equally creative, featuring creepy crawly creatures and larger-than-life bosses that feel like they belong in the Addams universe. The game isn't perfect by any stretch. Because it's entirely open-ended, the game leaves it up to the player to figure out in which order it's best to complete the stages, and until you figure that out, the game can feel like an impossible challenge. But when you manage to crack the code of finishing the stages that give you extra heart containers before you move on to rescuing family members, the Addams Family is a platformer like none other, and is well deserving of the #1 spot on the list. And there you have it, proof that the Amiga could deliver some cracking platformers when it wanted to. Sure, the machine might not have been the go-to for the genre, but these games show that it was more than capable of holding its own. When you look at the best of the best, each game here gave us something special, something uniquely Amiga. Now it's your turn. What do you think of the list? Are you already furiously typing in the comments that I left out Lionheart or Magic Pockets? Let me know what you think. If you want to see another one, check out my top 10 Amiga racing games list. And as always, be sure to subscribe if you want more of these videos. Until next time, adios!